So I asked you last time to look at the law of the sea. Is there anyone who tried to look at that? Anyone who tried to look at that, the law of the sea? Did anyone attempt to? Okay. Like I said, when we're referring to the territory of a certain state, it does not only include the landmass and other things that are so obvious, but it also includes the sea, the underground water. And specifically here, the water that we're talking about is international waters. Previously, there was no order in the manner in which activities could be conducted on the sea. So anyone would carry out activities as they wished on the waters. But I'm sure you're aware of the fact that marine activities have become increasingly important, because I would say that the world is changing. The number of activities which are actually now taking place in terms of trade, in terms of passage, in terms of economic activities, which can actually gain you some income and so on. So because of that, it appears that there arose some disputes. So some disputes began to be experienced by different states as they wanted to benefit from these waters. So as a result of that, the United Nations decided to try and come up with legislation that could regulate the manner in which these waters were being dealt with. Of course, when we talk about these states, you find that a certain state maybe is the one which contains a larger part of some of these international waters. So this raises questions as to what other states can do regarding that water, or do they have any rights over that water, or if an offense is committed, who exercises jurisdiction, and so on. So this is the part of international law where we discussed that, and the United Nations in 1982 passed the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So this convention is the guideline which guides us on the demarcations of waters. And what it further does is that once it identifies a certain part, beginning with internal waters and international waters, it will prescribe to us the nautical miles. So this is very important for you. If a question was to come in the exams, you need to know, for example, if it is the high seas, what nautical miles are we talking about? What is the description of the high seas? What do the high seas contain? What activities take place in the high seas? So basically, those are the things that we look out for when we are dealing with the issue of the law of the sea. So Grotius, let me just read a brief introduction here. That the law of the sea is that law by which both coastal and landlocked countries regulate their relation in respect of those areas subject to the jurisdiction of coastal states, and in relation to those areas of the sea and seabed beyond national jurisdiction. The rules governing the sea are drawn from both custom and treaty law. The concept of freedom of the seas developed as a limitation that restricted national attempts to unreasonably extend the range of exclusive coastal sovereignty into international waters. Such rights conflicted with the rights of all states to fish and to navigate over international trade routes. Historically, navigation on the high seas was open to everybody, as were also fisheries. But in the 15th and 16th centuries, the period of great maritime discovery by European navigators, claims were laid by the powerful maritime states to exercise sovereignty indistinguishable from ownership over specific portions of the open sea. For example, Portugal claimed maritime sovereignty over the whole of the Indian Ocean and a very great portion of the Atlantic Ocean. Spain claimed virtually the whole of the Pacific Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico, while Britain laid claim to the North Sea. Grotius was one of the first scholars to attack these extensive claims, and his objections were based primarily on two grounds. One, no ocean can be property of a nation because it is impossible for any nation effectively to take into possession by occupation. Two, nature does not give a right to anybody to appropriate things that may be used by everybody and are exhaustible. In other words, the open sea is res gentium or res extra commercium. So, in short, we are looking at this point, we are looking at the introduction to the law of the sea. Like I mentioned earlier, that due to increased industrial activity, it gave rise to states to begin to carry out economic activities. Some will just need these waters for passage and so on. So I would say it has more of an economic bearing. This is why we see that some countries were claiming to possess international waters. But what you need to know about things such as land and water, these are scarce resources. So since they are scarce resources, there's no one person who can just come out to say, this is my river, this is my lake, and so on. It is because from those same little resources that we have, all of us are expected to benefit in one way or the other. So to try and resolve these controversies, to try and resolve these conflicts, hence the development of the law of the sea. So the UN met in Geneva from 24th February to 27th April in 1958. And they adopted 4 conventions: the Convention on the Territorial Sea and the Contiguous Zone, the Convention on the High Seas, the Convention on Fishing and Conservation of the Living Resources of the High Seas, and the Convention on the Continental Shelf. So this is the beginning of the demarcations of the different parts of the sea. So after demarcating the different parts of the sea, in short, we're talking about waters, both internal and international waters, they now attach to them certain guidelines that would assist us in knowing more about that particular piece of water. So in 1982, the United Nations Law of the Sea was actually enacted, and it was the product of the third multilateral treaty negotiation on the law of the sea, consisting of numerous meetings from 1974 to 1982, and 170 nations originally signed the treaty. So the demarcation as follows: we have internal waters, territorial sea, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, high sea, continental shelf, and deep seabed. So when we talk about these particular parts of the waters, we are supposed to know, for example, what do they actually cover. So let's start with internal waters. Internal waters are waters on the landward side of the baseline of the territorial sea. So the state has the right to control its bays, rivers, and other internal waters. It has sovereign right to expel invaders and has interest in monitoring military and commercial activities of foreign vessels. So that is what internal waters are all about. And then under internal waters, we have ports, we have bays as well. Take time to go through those. And then we'll go to the territorial sea. States have always disagreed between the high seas and the territorial sea. Board unilateral decisions were witnessed in the 15th and 16th centuries, extending the range of national claims deep into what is now considered a high sea area. So Denmark and Sweden claimed large portions of the globe's northern sea. So each claimed complete sovereignty over the Baltic Sea. So the sheer inability to control such vast areas offered credibility to the canon-short theory of coastal jurisdiction. So when we talk about the canon-short theory of jurisdiction, in short, we're trying to see like what area exactly does a particular part of the territorial sea belong to a certain state, because certain seas can be shared between several countries. So a mechanism had to be developed which would help determine like for how many nautical miles a particular state could claim jurisdiction, and at which point could both states claim jurisdiction, because you find that there's a common point at which two states which share this particular sea can claim jurisdiction. So we're talking about the canon short. So a nation could only claim the adjacent seabelt that could actually control with its shore-based military power. So under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the territorial sea extends outwards 12 nautical miles from the national coastline. So if you are asked a question, maybe to write on different parts of the sea, this is what I'll be expecting you to write on. If you say the territorial sea, can you explain what the territorial sea is all about? How many nautical miles, maybe? What activities are contained there? So the coastal state exercises, so the territorial sea extends outwards 12 nautical miles from the national coastline. The coastal state exercises sovereignty over this portion of territory to the same extent that it does over its landmass. Its range of sovereignty includes the airspace over the territorial sea, the seabed below, and the subsoil within this zone. Under international law, a state must exercise its sovereignty in this strip of water. So you can read the case of Anglo-Norwegian fisheries case of 1951. So under the territorial sea, there's what is known as the baseline. So the territorial sea begins at each baseline. And each baseline begins where the ocean's edge meets the coastline. So this topic may not be a very friendly topic, and I would advise you that if you're not comfortable with answering the question on this topic, leave it. But if you understand it, I think it's an interesting topic, provided you master these same measurements that we are being given. So those are the things that you need to take note of under the territorial sea. And in the Anglo-Norwegian fisheries case, that is where we were given a guideline on how to calculate that. And the activities that actually are found on the territorial sea, we'll look at the first one, which is the right of innocent passage. So the right of innocent passage is found in the territorial sea. And the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea defines passage as a navigation through the territorial sea for the purposes of traversing that sea without entering internal waters or proceeding to and from internal waters. So the right of innocent passage simply means that other states are allowed to pass on these waters known as territorial seas, provided they do not disturb the peace of that state on which the waters are situated. Look at a country like Zambia, which is a landlocked country. So imagine if we do not enjoy so you can imagine if we do not enjoy rights such as innocent passage, what would happen to transportation of our goods? So you can see that the United Nations has tried as much as possible to ensure that all of us, whether we are landlocked or not, we are able to benefit from international waters. And then the other thing is strait passage. So another effect of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea is the expansion of the territorial sea from 3 to 12 miles, and a number of strategic straits or natural sea passages that connect to two large maritime areas. So for example, we have the Strait of Hormuz, which connects Persian Gulf and Indian Ocean, the Strait of Gibraltar, and so on. So this one is, it presents a problem because the channel of a strait is more than 12 miles from each of the national coasts bordering on the strait. So this can be a bit problematic, but when such a strait is less than 24 miles wide at its narrowest point, it contains only territorial waters. So what you will find here is that they are trying to describe like how big a strait is, because some straits, if they go just up to 12 nautical miles, they may be considered to be internal waters. But if some straits go beyond 24 nautical miles, they will be considered to be international waters. So meaning if they are internal waters, then it is the state which will exercise jurisdiction. But once they become international waters, it means that jurisdiction will be determined according to the rules established by the convention. So I'll just advise you to take more time and try to understand this topic. It's quite interesting, but we cannot spend so much time because we've got a number of topics to cover to finish the syllabus, but at least I have been able to guide you on how to go about the law of the sea. Then we have the high seas as well. And these are often referred to as international waters and consist part of the ocean not subject to complete sovereignty of any state. So the concept of the freedom of the high seas applies only to that portion of the sea not included in the exclusive economic zone, territorial sea, and internal waters. So the freedom of the high seas is to be enjoyed by all states, covers freedom of navigation, of fishing, to lay submarine cables and pipelines, and the freedom of overflight. These freedoms must be exercised with reasonable regard to the interests of other states. So all of us are entitled to exercise freedoms over the high seas because they are international waters. So they should not constitute part of any of these waters which are considered to be internal waters. And the jurisdiction over ships on the high seas lies with the flag state. Thus, both military and mercantile ships are immune from the jurisdiction of any other state other than the flag state. So we go to the other part of the sea, which is the contiguous zone. The zone extends from the baseline to 24 nautical miles. So a coastal state may exercise limited jurisdiction. So the activities of foreign states or their vessels in this zone are subject to the jurisdiction of the coastal state for the express purpose of enforcing custom, fiscal, immigration, or sanitary laws. The contiguous zone and proximity to the coastline requires a balance between international and interests of the coastal state. So you can see that there are a number of issues: fiscal, custom, immigration, and so on. So when you are passing on this part of the sea, then you might be required to even maybe pay something to the coastal state. So that is the contiguous zone. And then we have the exclusive economic zone, which is the EEZ. So this is the area beyond and adjacent to the territorial sea, which shall not extend beyond 200 nautical miles. So it may not extend beyond 200 nautical miles from the baselines from which the breadth of the territorial sea is measured. And the coastal states do not have complete sovereignty, but only sovereign rights for the purposes of exploring and exploiting, conserving and managing the natural resources, whether living or non-living, of the seabed and subsoil and the subsurgent waters. And jurisdiction with regard to establishment and use of artificial islands, installations, and structures, marine scientific research, and protection and prevention of marine environment. So this is the exclusive economic zone. We also have the continental shelf. So the continental shelf is a geographical term used to describe the gently sloping edge covered by shallow water projecting from the shoreline of many land masses before a steep descent to the ocean waters. Continental shelves vary considerably in width. Off the west coast of the USA, the shelf is less than 5 miles, whereas the entire of the North Sea is continental shelf. So normally it extends to a depth of approximately 200 meters, at which point the seabed falls sharply. So all these parts of the sea are actually well defined in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So the coastal state exercises sovereign rights for the purposes of exploring and exploiting its natural resources. And then this is the last part, the deep seabed. I was just briefly going through them to give you an idea. You need to take time to go through this topic. So this one is rich in minerals, particularly manganese nodules. And the extraction of these minerals is now thought to be scientifically feasible, and therefore there has been heightened interest in deep seabed. With this increasing interest, a number of questions have arisen. For example, to whom should the resources found there belong? Should they belong to the few countries with the technological know-how to exploit them, or should they be conserved for future use by those nations which are yet to acquire technology capable of exploiting these resources? So the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea makes the deep seabed a common heritage of all mankind, and no state can claim to exercise sovereignty or sovereign rights in this area. In order to ensure that activities in this part of the ocean benefit all mankind, the convention provides for the creation of an international seabed authority, which is mandated to carry out all deep seabed exploration and exploration of resources. And this authority is required to ensure that the proceeds from the activities in this area are equally shared between all states in such a manner as to foster healthy development of the world economy and balanced growth of international trade, and to promote international cooperation for the overall development of all countries, especially developing countries. So basically that's a summary of the law of the sea. Let me quickly move on to diplomatic and consular immunities. Unless if there's a question or you need a clarification on the law of the sea, then you may go ahead and ask. If there's a question, you can ask. Okay, some questions. I'll talk about diplomatic and consular immunities. So this is a topic which we are familiar with. The issue of diplomats, diplomatic representatives in other countries started in Greece. So that is where it developed, and eventually now it has been adopted by the entire world. So you will find certain words in your module on page 60 under diplomatic and consular functions, where they're defining certain terms which are connected to this topic. So such as embassy, mission, premises, charge the affairs. So you can just go through those definitions and be familiar with them. I think we're having less than 10 minutes left. Okay, I'll be able to tell you when we'll restart the other meeting. We've got about 9 minutes left, so I'll continue. So the United Nations enacted 2 conventions, and we have the 1961 and the 1963 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic and Consular Relations. So there's a slight difference between a diplomat and a consular. When a person is sent to represent the head of state directly, that person is known as a diplomat. We also have the consular department, which is a department which deals with citizens' affairs directly. So this is what we refer to when we say consular functions. So there's a difference between the two. So Article 3 of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations gives us the following as functions of the diplomat: representing the state in the receiving state, protecting the interest of the sending state and its nationals, negotiating with the government of the receiving state, ascertain by lawful means conditions and developments in the receiving state, and report them to the government of the sending state, promoting friendly relations between the sending state and the receiving state. So you can see that a diplomat is mainly focused on directly the relationship between the sending state and the receiving state. Hence, there is need for another office to be functional, which deals particularly with the affairs of the citizens of the sending state in the receiving state. So this is the consular department, and the functions are protecting the interests of the sending state and its nationals within the limits permitted by international law, furthering the development of commercial, economic, cultural, and scientific relations, and otherwise promoting friendly relations, ascertaining conditions and developments in the commercial, economic, cultural, and thereon to the government of the sending state and other interested persons, issue passports and travel documents to nationals of the sending state, and visas or appropriate documents to persons wishing to travel to the sending state. So this is Article 5 of the Vienna Convention. And safeguarding the interests of the nationals, including minors and other persons lacking full capacity of the sending state. So a person can go out there, they fall sick, they die there or they find themselves in very difficult circumstances. So we expect the consular department to take up such issues quickly, communicate maybe to the family of that person here in Zambia, mobilize resources if it is accommodation that is needed, medical attention, and so on. And you find that in circumstances where maybe this person is supposed to be deported, we expect this department to come in quickly and perhaps help them with travel documents so that they travel safely back to Zambia, or perhaps help them negotiate for something else better than being deported. And representing or arranging appropriate representation for nationals of the sending state before the tribunals and other authorities of the receiving state, where such tribunals, where such nationals are unable to assume the defense of their own rights, exercising rights of supervision and inspection provided for in the laws and regulations of the sending states for vessels having the nationality of the foreign state, assist vessels and aircraft and their crews, or take statements regarding the voyage of a vessel, examining and stamping the ship's papers. So the consular department is a department which is more concerned with the affairs of the citizens of the sending state, and they have to do everything possible to ensure that these citizens are safe, and in case there is any challenge with the citizens, then they need to take an upper hand in trying to resolve that particular issue. So we have 4 minutes remaining. I think for this meeting, I can end it